It is Friday, November 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another HD 2D remake episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The November PS Plus Essential lineup still live on PSN. Claim those games before they go away. Also, we have the November PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup going live on the 19th. And for PS Plus Extra, we have Grand Theft Auto 5 back in the lineup. So that game has been going in and out a few times now at this point, from what I recall. But you've also got Dying Light 2, MotoGP 24, The Sims 4 Island Living, Digimon Survive, Overcooked coming back again. So a lot of stuff just rotating in and out, but Extra not looking terrible. Going into PS Plus Premium, though, we have Synapse for PSVR 2, and then Blood Omen Legacy of Kain PS1, Blood Omen 2 PS2, and then some new PS3 streaming titles, Resistance Fall of Man and Resistance 2. Now, first, I'll just quickly say that for Synapse PSVR 2, loved that game. That's one of my favorite VR titles as of late. That game was so fun. Really makes you feel like this cool futuristic spy shooter. I don't know, it's a really weird, bizarre game in a way, and it's actually got a cool story as well. It's a roguelite, by the way, too, which is a gameplay hook that I typically enjoy. But with that recommendation out of the way, let's talk about the elephant in the room here, Resistance 1 and 2 for PlayStation 3. Now, most should know, it's streaming. These are streaming-only titles. This is easily confirmed, so I know some folks saw this immediately, got very excited, but, I mean, we have to be a little realistic here. I would think if they ever did, finally start offering locally played PlayStation 3 games, a new PlayStation 3 emulator. Granted, they didn't really do anything too exciting when they announced PlayStation 2 games. It was just sort of like, oh, yep, on the blog post, there they are. But in the case of PlayStation 3, I would almost expect that if they ever did finally do something with this meaningfully, they might make it a bigger announcement outside of just putting it on the PlayStation blog. Having said that, for Resistance 1 and 2, this is something I had to double check because Resistance 3 has been on PlayStation now. 1 and 2, I think, never have been on there, which is really surprising because the only sort of good thing about the possibility of getting local playback for PlayStation 3 games, Sony finally building an emulator and this and that, which I've said many times over would take many years and it might not even happen on PlayStation 5 or even PS5 Pro. There's just not the CPU overhead there that I think realistically would be a good solution long term. Maybe it's a PS6 thing, but I digress. Putting all that aside, the only good thing we've ever had about this circumstance is that the PlayStation 3 server blades that they've made and maintained for over 10-something years are very old, archaic, probably not great in terms of power consumption. It's really miraculous that they've still been using these things, and I fully expected, like, not only are we going to start losing PS3 streaming titles on the catalog, but we might not see any new ones come back. We haven't had any new ones show up in a very long time, from what I remember correctly. So 1 and 2 are, I think, completely new offerings outside of, again, Resistance 3 has been on there before. So I don't know. I don't really know what to make of this. I mean, it's just fine, I guess. It's cool to have them on there, but it is streaming, so for many folks, you see this news, you go, okay, well, that means they're just not even there for me, because you don't want to play those games that way. I'm right there with you. I expect they're still operating on those same server blades, so the experience is going to be the exact same as it's always been. So with that in mind, it's kind of a whatever, let's move along news story, but at the very least, I am genuinely surprised that they decided to put something new on there that we haven't had on there previously. They're Sony IPs, so there's really no license hurdle per se, but it's at least refreshing to see, like, a lot of folks come out the woodwork saying, like, oh my god, Resistance, it's cool to have these games back and they're playable in some fashion, even though it's not ideal. Moving on to our next news story, Sony finally confirmed and then also pulled back their announcement for their PS5 sales plan for this holiday season. So a lot of people probably saw the initial trailer, but then they also took it down. So it sounds like they did this too early, but what we do know is that the console is now going to go on sale very soon, probably, for, we expect, $379.99 USD. That's the number they put on the console for the digital edition, which they did also use the language of PS5 now starting at $379.99 USD. Since some people probably saw the trailer initially and wondered, why are they not talking about the disc console? Is that going on sale? Because we heard from Bilbo Kun that this console and also that Fortnite bundle is probably going to go on sale, and we do know that the the sale should last until December 24th, so right before Christmas. But they actually did take down that trailer, so it sounds like the sale is coming, just that they maybe announced this a bit too soon. And that's also why when they made that announcement, the sale didn't start, and they didn't say when the sale was starting. So it probably is still coming, and that is probably the price it will start at, either that or the $74.99 that Bilbo Kun said. But yeah, that was a little weird thing, so it sounds like they just showed that off a little bit too early. Next up, this is more of a little PSA here, but for the PlayStation VR camera adapter for PS5, which you need that adapter to connect a PS4 camera to PS5 to play PSVR 1 on this console, that is being discontinued as of November 26th, or until supplies last, confirmed on the PlayStation website, where you would typically supply your serial number of your PSVR 1 headset to then get a free camera adapter. That is how it works. If you already have a PSVR 1 headset, you can get a free camera adapter to use that on PlayStation 5. You need that to play PSVR 1 games on this console. So they are discontinuing that, which is not great news because there are many PSVR 1 games that are basically stuck on that headset, like truly PSVR 1 exclusive titles that are likely not going to get a port, which means if you decide to get PSVR 1 sometime down the road and you want to play it on PlayStation 5, you are going to have to try and get that camera adapter on the aftermarket. Something to keep in mind if you have PSVR 1 right now and you have not claimed your free camera adapter. Moving on to our next story, we have not quite a rumor, but more so speculation based on something Sony did, which recently was uploading this live-action advertisement to their YouTube channel for PlayStation 5, which is not uncommon. They've done a few of these now at this point, and so there are a few frames in that video where they show a bus terminal, and then there's the dates 3/12 on there, and the time is set to 2024, which is clearly referencing the 30th anniversary for PlayStation, but that still led some to think that, okay, maybe they'll do something on that date specifically, like a showcase, a live stream, state of play, maybe a PSX event, which the window for that is well past being feasible, so it's clearly not that. But it still led some to wonder that maybe they'll do something for the 30th anniversary. Why would they put that in that advertisement? We did recently have Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb chime in on this, mentioning that he's not heard anything about a state of play or a showcase planned for December, and one shouldn't be expected anyway, which Jeff's been very privy to upcoming events and state of play, so there's very likely some truth to what he's not heard so far, the lack of hearing anything about an event coming up, which we're already pretty close as is, so it sounds like nothing is coming. We do have the Game Awards coming up very soon, though, and Sony does typically bring something to the TGAs. They don't show up to every single Jeff Keighley event. They usually skip Gamescom every now and again, but we might see something there. I have no doubt Sony will probably say some things before the year closes out, but in terms of maybe a bigger showcase or something, I mean, sure, they would maybe want to do this during the 30th anniversary, and I'm sure date of, they will do a PlayStation blog post at the very minimum, talking about, you know, the 30th anniversary. I'm sure they'll have some kind of special thing that they'll do day of, but in terms of what people are expecting, I wouldn't really hold out hope for that. It's certainly possible, and Sony is the kind of company where they have done little teases and things like that, inserting into ads and, you know, gameplay trailers, and they'll do social media stuff. It has happened before, but it's one of those things where it doesn't happen as often as people think. So while we did have the 30th anniversary PS5 console design show up in the 30th anniversary advertisements before PS5 Pro was officially confirmed, and whether that was intentional or not, the point is that doesn't mean it happens every single time. So the 1% where it happens, that doesn't always equate to the 99 other times where people are thinking something is happening and it ends up not being true. So while we can reference certain dates and shows they've done in December previously, that's not always a guarantee. So having said that, this is kind of a we'll wait and see sort of thing, but I wouldn't really expect anything either. Next up, let's talk about Astrobot, because yesterday was the final DLC speedrun level that they put out. But it turns out we might actually get more DLC levels, because if you remember, the credits in the game had a bunch of properties listed on there that did not appear in the base game. And so that meant, okay, that might be the IP that show up as VIP bots in these upcoming speedrun levels. But not only have all those levels been released and some of those IP did not show up as cameo bots, but the credits were updated again for another property in there as well, which I won't say just in the interest of not spoiling it, but it sounds like we we are probably going to get more DLC bots and DLC levels on the way, whether paid or maybe there's going to be more free content. It just sounds like there is more, and this was not the final level that we had just gotten yesterday. So I am all for that, especially because now with these 5 levels live on PSN, I will be jumping in and playing those, and you might actually just see that as an upload coming up very soon, since I was waiting for them to be banked up, essentially. Let's move on to LEGO Horizon Adventures, which came out yesterday, and sure enough, it did land around where I was expecting critically, which was not outstanding per se, but also not necessarily bad. I think it's like a 70-something on Metacritic right now, and that's across 70-plus different reviews. So certainly a fine, cutesy game, has some things going for it, so probably a nice short experience if you're looking to play more LEGO games and if you like the Horizon IP, so that's personally right up my alley. But what we can say, because this was always a little weird too, it's like, okay, so another LEGO, or a LEGO game in general, not another LEGO set? Well, not entirely true. So the Instagram account named The Brick Reporter is apparently known for posting info about upcoming LEGO sets. This is news to me, obviously, but they are teasing a new set coming out, and it will be released in March 2025, which we can see either a Ravager or a Sawtooth in there, but it does seem like we are going to get new LEGO sets, or at least one new LEGO set, which I do hope it's maybe more of a big thing where it's like we could build a Thunderjaw or something. I think that'd be really cool, but it's weird that like they maybe would not want to align those products closer together. Sometimes it's just a logistical thing, but maybe they want the game to be on the market for longer or something. Who really knows at this point, but it does sound like there is more LEGO stuff on the way. We also now know who is going to be replacing Silence. Of course, the previous voice actor being Lance Reddick tragically passed away too soon, but that is now being done by Tim Russ, previously known for playing Tuvok in Star Trek, and they also appeared in Forbidden West voicing Jakata. That's somebody in the Tanakh tribe that you meet for some side quests, so sounds like we do know who is probably going to be carrying on Lance's legacy for that all-important character, Silence. Now, unfortunately, we should also mention the recent passing of Tony Todd, who provided the voice talent for Venom and Marvel Spider-Man 2, but also just had a ridiculous storied career. I'll never forget the haunting experience of watching Candyman as a kid. That stuff really freaked me out back then, but he's had so many amazing roles, just most recently being the voice for Venom and Marvel Spider-Man 2, relevant to our PlayStation news here. So Insomniac also put up this really heartwarming message saying that they're heartbroken by the passing of their friend, and he brought so much joy to the studio during the production of Marvel Spider-Man 2, and many fans around the world with his intimidable voice and presence. We are Venom forever. So truly tragic news, especially knowing that for Insomniac there was more Venom stuff on the way. We're still not entirely sure if that was going to be a separate game and when that's coming, or if it's, say, scrapped and that's going into Spider-Man 3. We still don't know the exact details, but just we were expecting more of Tony Todd, which would have been great, obviously, because that voice really is so haunting and he can deliver an amazing experience. But that is something that happened recently. Rest in peace to Tony Todd and the family. Now, going back to the Horizon news, though, we do have a pretty big indicator that maybe they're finally getting ready to release the Horizon Online game sometime next year, maybe the first half of next year, because this job posting was spotted on Guerrilla's site by JoeRaptor for a release QA intern, which the job does specifically point out that you'll acquire both theoretical knowledge and practical experience to ensure the game is prepared for launch, and the internship is available for the first half of 2025. So that couldn't be more concrete as far as what they're looking to do, which is possibly ship a video game sometime in the first half of 2025. What could that game possibly be? Well, the next in the pipeline that makes the most sense would be the Horizon multiplayer game, where that has been in the oven since 2018. We know it wasn't canceled. It's pretty far along. We've had leaks. And so that could be the kind of game where, and this dials back to what we've been saying many times over as far as like Sony's release cadence and also how they announce games nowadays, which is typically they'll do a formal announcement and the game actually comes out much sooner than people tend to think, or certainly what we've seen during the PlayStation 4 life cycle. So it would not be unusual to maybe see this game get a formal announcement and then ship before the second half of 2025, right? So maybe it's finally happening. We still know this game is intended to be a sort of co-op multiplayer PvP, PvE style game. Maybe they'll still keep the cartoony characters. It could look a lot different from when we last saw it, because games just look a certain way for a long time up until they finally come out. So either way, we might be very close to this game finally showing up. I still don't have the biggest confidence level in this game in particular. I do think there's a lot of upside to the Horizon property. It's just that lately there's been some very low sentiment from SIE published live service titles. Horizon still oftentimes can get a bad rap, even though I find that's still a vocal crowd that just loves to say how much they dislike Horizon. But it still would be, I think, a very tough environment nowadays. So I'm curious to see how this one will pan out when they're ready to show this thing off. Next up, we have some news for Naughty Dog's next game, which is not really revealing news, but it's still nice to hear something about this game, so we'll at least mention that Neil Druckmann recently was on this conversation called Jewish Visionaries in Gaming. Ken Levine was on there as well. They were just talking about their work in the games business, things like that. The live stream is gone now. You can't see it anymore, but during that conversation, they were talking about their work, and so for Neil, he mentioned that their next game that he's directing has been in development since 2020, and that while Sony does not directly interfere with the game itself, it's still up to them on when that game will be announced. And those are really the two big key takeaways there, which is, you know, news, but not really, because they shipped Part 2 in 2020, so okay, we can kind of work out what's going on there. And also, we've heard many times over that Sony does not always directly sort of get involved in such a manner where they're trying to tell the studios what they can and can't do. They sort of have their own due diligence, obviously, and in some cases, like, well, in light of Concord, you know, maybe they should step in a little bit sooner on certain projects. But generally, what we've always heard historically about PlayStation Studios is that they do give these teams creative autonomy. So that is also not too surprising there. So I think the thing that is maybe more misleading about this is that when we also compare this to The Last of Us Online and where the studio hierarchy was at the time, how many people are assigned to that project versus the new one, because there is a general makeup of these studios where sometimes it can be a little bit fuzzy in terms of what we can expect and what the next game is going to be. So surely there was a number of people in 2020 beginning the very early concept stage of what their next title is going to be. But when we do know for a fact that hundreds of people were working on The Last of Us Online up to its cancellation, and how long did it take for a lot of those people to start getting funneled into the new thing, that's where it can be a bit misleading in terms of when we can or cannot expect their next big single player release, which it's still unknown as far as how long that game is. I think we will see it sooner rather than later, but soon could still be pretty far away, all things considered. Having said that, that is all we really heard about this game. Moving on to some PlayStation 5 Pro news, we have some very early indicators that PS5 Pro is selling about as well, if not a little bit better, than PS4 Pro in the same time period. So initially this popped up with the Sony president, CFO, and COO Hiroki Totoki speaking with Nikkei, where he said, and I quote here, "It is a high-end product targeted at core customers, so we haven't been eyeing a large sales plan to begin with. I'm under the impression that the product is performing slightly stronger than the pre-orders of PS4 Pro during the same period, so I don't think the price is adversely affecting the product's sales plan." Now, in light of that, we also just got some recent sales data coming out of Japan from Famitsu that showed PS5 Pro sold 78,000 units. For comparison's sake, PS4 Pro sold about 65,000 units during the launch week where it came out back in 2016. So even though it's very early data in only one country, it's the one country where PlayStation home consoles have not really been that strong, although in the context of Japan, PS5 I think is actually further ahead from PS4 when launch aligned in total, so base consoles and now the Pro. Just globally, PS5 is still, I think, a little bit behind PS4. But yeah, with Hiroki's words, this one example, it's still in that same neighborhood. I mean, it's something we mentioned well before the console was confirmed, before we had a price tag. It is going to be low volume, even though it is still a very high price tag, which I find too is like higher than I thought this thing was going to be. Just a matter of like, okay, is it still going to be in that neighborhood of like 1 out of every 5 consoles sold is going to be a Pro? Well, I wouldn't be shocked if that is the case, and it looks like that might actually be what's going on, but I'm sure we will get some hardware sales data and insights coming out of the UK and the United States as well, so we shouldn't have those too far behind. Now, if you remember from last week's episode, we had some Sony financials, but it was something where it was so late in the night to where the transcript and the live stream was not archived just yet, so I wasn't able to catch it in time, and therefore we just didn't really know exactly what was said. So now we're getting some quotes out of the Q&A portion of the financial report, where, again, Sony's CFO, President, the COO, Hiroki Totoki, was asked a number of questions, and so one thing he was asked about was the PSN requirement on PC, their current live service output, and how that's been going. And so Hiroki said, and I quote here, "We have learned a lot. The way to face the issues regarding PC, for instance, the PlayStation accounts that we have offered, well, actually by offering them, for instance, sometimes that tends to invite pushback. But for the live service games, in order to maintain order of the gaming so that anybody can enjoy the game safely, we need to create an environment conducive to that and, of course, enjoying the game freely." That is such a PR non-answer to what is a very expected issue of, we know that there's pushback, but we don't care, we're still trying to require it. We'll acknowledge that there's pushback, but we're suits and we want PSN accounts on PC, which, ironic given that for Helldivers 2, which is a live service game, that's the one they felt, okay, we really got to back off this one, which this language might imply they'll try and do it again at some point, who knows. I'm sure that would not really go over well, but the other obvious issue here is that you don't need PSN accounts for single player games. I have no doubt in my mind there's probably a number of people at SIE that are advocating for the non-requirement of PSN accounts. There are still always going to be people at the companies that will advocate for the right thing on paper, but there's still going to be shot callers above them that make this hard stance of PSN is required. So it sounds like they're the ones that are winning in the behind the scenes. Now, getting into the really big elephant in the room here for the financial Q&A that we were waiting to hear about was what investors would be asking Sony in relation to Concord and Firewalk. And so we do have a quote here from Hiroki Totoki where he says, and I quote, "So for us, for our reflection, we probably need to have a lot of gates, including user testing or internal evaluation and the timing of such gates. And then we need to bring them forward, and we should have done these gates much earlier than we did." He then goes on to talk about how Sony has been a very siloed organization, which in the context of game studios, and that goes back to the Naughty Dog story, which is true historically, they do have their own autonomy and they can be creative and progress at their own pace in a lot of ways where it's not always them being checked in on and hounded in such a manner where it's what people might have expected for a game like Concord, or at least how did Concord get far along to where they ended up shipping it in the state that it was in, and how were they not mindful or aware of what shape the game was in. So there's so many aspects of that story that we've already talked about before, but basically he's acknowledging the problem, which, you know, big shocker there, like that the game failed. So they have to sort of take some level of accountability. And it's still a very brief answer. I think he was asked like 3-4 times in different ways about Concord, but essentially they're trying to talk about how it's like, okay, we had Helldivers 2, that was successful. We had Concord, it was a failure, and we're taking those learnings and we're going to be applying them into the next round of titles, which there are certain aspects that they can try and address, others maybe not so much. At this point in the game, I mean, it seems very clear that as far as live service goes, they can't really approach it in the same manner they've always done for their single-player games, which typically has been not just big budget, but when you are talking about a budget that's so high and there's a lot of risk involved with those kind of ideas, and whether they're sequels or not, it's a very risky endeavor when you're in the $200 million plus range. But even then, single-player still has this sort of, I don't want to say level of security, but it's not in the same manner as a live service game where you need player testing, and Sony has just not made games like that. Like, even to this day, you know, early access is not really a thing on PlayStation Network. They can sort of look the other way in some cases if the game is finished enough to a degree, and that's how you have Palworld on there, for an example. But they don't have like a super early access Steam kind of setup where things that are kind of broken and look muddy and all pieced together don't get to be shipped on PlayStation Network. That's not how they've operated things as far as what you can publish on the store, but also making games. That's a very new thing for Sony. So maybe they have to start doing something like that. You know, look at what other teams have done and maybe invest only a few $1,000,000 to get a very playable build out there and let players just mess around with it and have this feedback loop over a very long period of time directly with the players, to where you can build a Baldur's Gate 3 long term, or Valve's Deadlock. I mean, at a certain point, there is a lot of value in having the players try out the product that early, and they will determine if the game is going to be able to go somewhere or not. It's such a different way of how Sony has never made games before. So it's not really in the company's culture or principles, but at this point in the game, that's probably what they have to start really considering. And so there's a lot of titles that they're still working on right now that are probably well past that point of what would be early access. But it's just, that's likely what has to happen if they're still going to be committed to live service. So we'll see how this plays out, but that is their answer for Concord. All right, moving on to a really insane story from this past week that popped up from Abdul Hakam, best known for being Hakum on PSN, which some might remember or know of Hakum because very early on he was the account that had a ridiculous amount of platinum trophies. I remember Hakum quite well from those early PS3 days where he was the first to cross over 100, I think, for platinums, which was really tough to do back then, and he always stuck with it, and he went on to get 5 Guinness Book of World Records, and I think nowadays he did kind of cool down on it, but basically he did put up this video this past week airing out some grievances for this really bad experience he had where, well, I'm going to try and summarize this the best that I can, and he does admit that there's going to be mistranslation issues going on here, so the best that we understand it, here's what happened. On September 9th, his account was permanently suspended. He tried talking to customer support, but that didn't work, and then a few days later he received a message on WhatsApp from a random person claiming that his data was leaked online and that people were bribing PlayStation employees and stealing user data to buy and sell, and he's showing off all these screens and evidence, and so all of this was then forwarded over to PlayStation, and apparently their response to Hakum was that he had genuine violations, like platinuming 100-hour games in a few hours, or completing a game in 0 minutes, logging in 2,000 accounts on consoles, or logging into 29 different systems, which Hakum tries to respond to all those things. I mean, I myself am probably logged into more consoles than that, so over 17-something years, if you've got an old PSN account and you like to buy PlayStations, that's going to happen. Also, the account thing he mentions, like, oh, if I'm boosting multiplayer games, like, that's probably how that happened. And then 0-minute games being done that quickly. Well, we have auto pop trophies, obviously, so you can transfer files from 4 to 5 and auto pop there. We actually have had auto pops since Vita, PS3, and PS4, so it's always been a thing for a while, even though that does come in conflict with times where you can auto lock auto pop trophies and it's, say, not legitimate, but they're still genuine auto pops. So that could be the case too for games that are really long, but it takes a few hours. So like Death Stranding Director's Cut, I auto-popped most of them, but then got the rest of the platinums, or the rest of the platinum, I should say, in like 3 hours. So that does happen. Anyway, the point is, after all of that, he has had his account restored, it's back up, but the core issue he wanted to talk about in this video was the data leakage, how Sony handled the entire thing. He also cut relations with them because he was a partner with them and getting review codes and things like that, so that's what happened. So it's not necessarily him trying to get the account back, is my understanding, because it is still up and he's playing games, just he's more or less saying, like, you know what, I'm done and I got to talk about this whole thing, which I can certainly sympathize with that. It does suck. It's got to be a really anxiety-driven sort of experience to go through when you have those kind of issues. Data leaks, buying and selling, the black market, it's all very real stuff, and so I have no doubt in my mind it probably does happen with PlayStation, and that's why very big companies do pen tests, and they have to try to make sure their back end is as secure as possible, and in the case of something where data can easily be leaked and compromised, and something where it doesn't matter if you have two-factor authentication on, you know, there's social engineering that can happen. There's issues going on with the front line with PlayStation customer service where your security is only as good as your worst performing customer service representative. If they're compromised, then the entire system is compromised. So that's also a big issue, and Sony historically does not really have a good look when it comes to security issues and security breaches. So this was not great to hear. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk around what claims are true or not, but like the reality is, I'm sure he wouldn't be saying these things if he didn't go through a certain degree of issues with his account, right? So Because I remember too, like back during the PS3 days, there were always like accusations about Hakum being multiple people and he was cheating trophies or this and that. But that's not really the point if we're talking about sensitive user data being bought and sold or something, right? Obviously that sucks. And so there's not much I can really say here outside of like you would hope Sony is investing the money necessary to make sure their front line is as secure as possible. Every company does have to deal with these things, and so you want Sony to be on the up and up regarding these issues. So this was not great to hear, and I sincerely hope they are doing more behind the scenes after having this pop up to maybe address some of these issues, because it very likely does happen. Moving on to our next news story, we now have the most clear answer we've seen from Microsoft so far when it comes to what games they may or may not bring over to PlayStation hardware, and it seems like anything is a possibility now. So when speaking with Bloomberg, the Microsoft CEO of gaming, Phil Spencer, talked about a number of things, like how they're open to more acquisitions, maybe not super huge ones, but some that have geographic diversity. They're also talking about working on a handheld, but it's still years away. And as for them releasing games on PlayStation and Nintendo, he said they're so far pleased with the results and that they will do more of that. Going on to say, and I quote here, "I do not see sort of red lines in our portfolio that say, thou must not." He also clarified that it's still too early to make a decision on the next Halo. But that is still the most firm answer as far as like what games we could see, which is anything. He's not outright saying that everything is coming over. He's just saying that when you think about a Halo, a Gears, or any sort of like really well-known Xbox property, that it's a distinct possibility that they might do that now for PlayStation and Nintendo. I'm sure they will still be a little picky in terms of how they do it and when they do it. At the end of the day, they're still going to prioritize their hardware and not necessarily a competitor's product. But it does seem like they're now being just more open with like, hey, Xbox is a thing that is not just tied directly to the console image anymore, which aligns with this recent marketing strategy they put out there, or a bunch of like ads and images where it says this is an Xbox, showing all these range of devices. It is a little, in my view, tone deaf. I mean, the writing's been on the wall for a while, but it still doesn't quite breathe a certain level of confidence in the Xbox buyer in the here and now, especially because all those things still don't really feel like Xboxes, maybe in the next 20, 30 years, but it's clear as day what the company is doing nowadays. So with that in mind, we'll keep watching Xbox Game Studios and see what the next thing is for PlayStation hardware. Now, speaking of PlayStation hardware, you might also be in the market for a lot of jewelry this coming holiday season. So if you're shopping for that special someone and you're looking to get them a very nice gift, well, you might also be able to take advantage of this sale as well at Hellsberg, where it's this place you can get jewelry. I've never heard of them up until recently, because they are offering this actual deal where if you spend $1,799, you get a free PlayStation 5. So 1,800 big ones, you can get yourself a free PS5 console. That is not too shabby. Although if I'm on the receiving end of that jewelry and my person also ends up getting a PlayStation 5, I would wonder what's going on. So that's that's a little bit silly. I saw this, I'm like, oh, that's a really weird thing to do. But I guess they're just speaking to that kind of audience, right? Like, oh, geez, I wonder why this guy's here spending a boatload of cash, right? Just hitting that $1,800 minimum to then walk away with a PlayStation 5. So if you're looking to buy some jewelry, might be able to kill two birds with one stone there. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and we are knee-deep in our PS5 Pro coverage. So we had the unboxing, teardown, noise test, that usual jazz. That was right before LTPS last week, so you probably all saw that. Just some basic tutorials for taking off the covers, changing out the M.2 drive. It's plug and play, which is really cool there. But also we did the test looking at PS4 games and that image quality setting now on PS5 Pro. Coming up might be like a first impressions thing. I don't know. I really want more time before a sort of definitive answer, but obviously the thing is like, oh yeah, it's better, but how much value are you going to put on that with the price tag? But yeah, we might have one or two more PS5 Pro things, and we're kind of already done with that, obviously. But other things coming up too, maybe some Astrobot stuff, not entirely sure. I got like a few things in the pipeline that we'll be trying to get up before the year closes out. So with that in mind, that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.